There you go. See, I told you they'd handle it. Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Evan Show. It's been a minute since I've been on our YouTube. Did you miss me? I am joined today by some lovely individuals today to talk about non-binary identities, which obviously is something very close to my heart. So we are going to talk about a ton of different things today. Please feel free to, input in the chat if you also identify as non-binary, if you have a loved one who's non-binary and you have some thoughts and feelings about the things we're talking about. We want to hear it because when we're talking about this community and when we are in this community, we are not the institutions which decide what non-binary is or not, right? We all are going to have our own experiences that we're talking about tonight, and you are welcome to share yours as well. We want to hear them, and it adds such enrichment to this conversation if you all participate with us. So, big spiel out of the way. Hello to those of you who have not met me before, because I haven't been on here in a minute. My name is Evan Johnson. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the Community and Youth Programming Manager for Trans Family Support Services. I am joined today by some other lovely members of our staff. Would you two like to introduce yourself? Maybe we could do Crystal first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal. My pronouns are they, them. I am the Outreach and Development Associate at Trans Family Support Services.
Perfect. And Atlas.
Hey y'all, Atlas. My pronouns are they, them, and he, him. They, there are in Spanish too. I'm the Bilingual Youth Programs Coordinator at Trans Family Support Services.
So as you can see, we are a sprightly, young group of empowered non-binary individuals. That's not to say all of us are this age range and look like this. And actually, that gets me started in immediately what I want to dive into with this conversation. Please, Atlas, why did we not all get... I have flags in my car. I have my flag in the car. Damn. Okay. Well, it doesn't matter. It's fine. We're here in spirit. We're showing up. So that actually kind of gets me started on a really cool point. So firstly, before I jump into that piece of our ages and how all of us identify, first, I just want to talk a little bit about, non-binary and what it is to be non-binary and what does non-binary mean. And I think there's this piece, obviously a part of my job is I get to do the education and the training portion with our organization. We get to do like these 90-minute, 2-hour trainings where we talk all about supporting this community. And a big part of that is things like terminology and definitions. And so for training purposes, we as an organization define non-binary as any gender identity which is not exclusively male or female. That's like a very broad, loose definition though. And so, all of us may interpret that a little bit differently. And so like for myself personally, I actually was just chatting with someone yesterday who had never really interacted with the trans community at all, let alone a non-binary person. And she was asking me, well, how do you identify? Do you identify as a man or a woman? And so for me personally, I identify with the non-binary community because I feel like gender is super fake. And that's certainly not true. For me, it's fake. For some people, gender is super real, and that is A-okay. I choose not to partake in gender, though. And so that's why, I personally identify as agender within the non-binary umbrella, neither male nor female, because I just don't feel like gender is a real thing. But that's my personal attachment to language and to identity. And so I think it's always really interesting to hear how other people feel about this language and where other people fall when it comes to identifying as non-binary and what that means for them. So I'm not sure if either of you want to chat a little bit about, what does it mean to you to be non-binary? And what does that language, what does that word hold for you? The awkwardness. Atlas, go ahead. No, go ahead,
I can go
Atlas.
first. Okay. Non-binary to me, like you said, also, I feel that gender is not real. It's made up in the sense that it exists, but it's made up. But non-binary, yeah, it means to me neither female nor male strictly, and it can look at like anything. And to me, any one individual just gives it its own meaning and to how they feel. Not everyone's gonna have the same definition of what non-binary means to them. And I find that's the beauty of it, of just being very unique and being yourself. I consider myself non-binary and transmasculine, so I do have some expression of gender, even though I don't feel like it's something that it's super strict, like it's law. It's the rule of life. It's just something that is made up with along with our society, just like money has been made up, our governments have been made up. I feel like it's just our society trying to express themselves, and even though it's conditioned us to think in a very binary way, it's definitely not binary. It's not one or the other. It's not just two. I feel like there's many different ways that people can express themselves, and definitely it's not something that should be confined to those two. That's just
I
my
love well, I love that piece that you said about, it's like money or it's like government, because that absolutely, I think money is a great way of putting it. And I feel like when I say gender is super fake, a lot of the times that may be misinterpreted as this piece of like, well, it doesn't matter. It certainly matters. Just like money matters in our society that we live in. But we have all agreed that money has value, right? And so what happens if somebody decides, no, this doesn't have any value to me? And so that's kind of how I feel about gender, right? This piece of gender absolutely exists, but because we've created it and because we've created such constructs around it. So I really like that, and I think it makes it a little bit easier for folks to understand that piece of comparing it to something else that's tangible, but also not concrete in its value. Thank you for that excellent little tidbit that I will now definitely be incorporating into trainings where I can fit it. Crystal, how about for you?
I just wanted to say that was really beautiful, what both of you said about it. I also feel similarly about like it doesn't like it's real, it's tangible, it's here, but also like it's a personal, like very special thing. Like not everyone gets to see what my gender means to me, or maybe they won't even understand it, but that's okay. You don't have to understand every single aspect of like someone else's gender, but just being like mindful of it and like validating of it. For me, I also feel like kind of detached from my gender. I'm in tune with it, but at the same time, I'm in tune with it differently than I think cis people are. And so I think I find a lot of joy in my gender, but at the same time, I am aware of its implications too.
I love it. I love that. And for those of you who are watching and who are listening, I'm very excited about this little panel because we've all been with the org for very different amounts of time. And so while I feel like I'm starting to know Atlas pretty well, they've been on our team for a little while now. Crystal is brand new to our staff, and so listening to them talk, I'm just like, fascinating. Like, let's chat more. And this is just my very selfish attempt to get to create this powerhouse of the non-binary forces within TFSS, and our other near and dear they them of the staff is behind the scenes doing all the tech stuff for us. So we're all here. We're gonna rule the world one of these days. So when we were talking about this, and Atlas, you brought up this piece of identifying as transmasculine. I also broadly identify as transmasculine. And then, Crystal talked a little bit about like how other people may not understand or even get to see their gender, right? And so this piece of the nuancy with we identify can be really intimate in our identities and who we are. And it's not something that's always very accessible for others to know. And so I think there's this piece of how we as non-binary individuals choose to outwardly present ourselves, choose to express ourselves and our gender, individuals who choose to medically transition versus individuals who don't choose to medically transition, who identify as non-binary, and where this decision comes from, and what does dysphoria look and feel like for non-binary individuals who experience it. And so I think that's a really interesting little topic we could kind of dive into, of this piece of how in your journey with identifying as non-binary, how did you come to be the physical representation of the person you are now, right? This piece of how did you get to where you are in regards to projecting yourself to society, right? Atlas, I know you have chosen to medically transition. Where was that decision for you? What did that feel like? What was the thought behind that? And kind of, I think there's that interplay of our own sense of identity, our own understanding that for us gender is fake versus the rest of the world really does still see gender. And so I think that can impact the way we navigate our identity. So I kind of threw it to you first, Atlas, if you want to talk a little bit about that. I love this like glare of your glasses. I did the same thing earlier. All three of us wear glasses. We're the same person, just copy pasted. This is actually a photoshopped video. We're not live right now. It's one person in many wigs. But Atlas, tell me about your gender presentation and how you got there, how you got here.
Well, it's a pretty long story. But I'll try to make it compact and just push it out. Ever since I was little, basically, I just felt more like a boy, and I have a gender nonconforming sister, and I feel like she was my role model for lots of things. She would dress more masculine, and her hairstyle was more masculine. She would play with the cars and the dinosaurs and all that, and I feel like I just took after her. So yeah, she was like the first person I saw breaking all those rules of the social constructs and dressing feminine or masculine. Um, but growing up, it felt more natural for me to express myself in a more neutral way. I just I wanted to push away all femininity that was placed upon me, and I just felt comfortable that way. And it wasn't until probably the end of elementary school that I started thinking a lot about cutting my hair, just making it short. For a long time, I just wore it in a ponytail because that's all I knew. That's that's what I felt like was more neutral. I didn't want to wear it down because it was too girly for me. I don't know. And for a long time, I just battled with myself, these inner battles of wanting to look masked, but being a girl and being seen as a girl and having a girl name. And it wore me out for a long time. And then puberty hit me, and I was like, whoa, I don't want this. I don't want this going on me. Why do I have to deal with all this with the menstruation, with the breast growing and all that? I felt really confused that that had to happen to me. Not confused about who I was, but more like, why am I going through all of these things? And I didn't know any of the terminology for gender and anything until probably sometime before graduating high school. I started learning about trans men and that they have the ability to transition from one gender to the other, and that's where it all started for me. But as I grew physically and age wise, I just really wanted to have top surgery. I knew I wanted my chest to be flat, and I knew I wanted to look more masculine. And I was really afraid. I was really afraid of what my family would think, of what people at school would think. So I just repressed it until I graduated. And it wasn't until I graduated high school that I finally started binding my chest with an actual binder, and not resorting to um, other ways of binding, like um, stacking uh, sports bras and stuff. Um, but yeah, for a while I just binded, and tried to look wear guy shirts and clothes that just look more masculine. And I finally moved out in 2018, and living alone is just trying to find those resources that could help me, some leads to transitioning and stuff. It was really stressful because I couldn't find anything, and eventually I did, and I started hormones, and everything started looking up from there. I just started saving up, and I had top surgery last year. It's been a year, and I haven't been more comfortable with myself, even though I haven't been at the gym for a long time. I feel good.
Good. I love that. Well, and I'm curious about it because this is definitely something that I've talked to other non-binary people who choose to, especially transmasculine individuals who start testosterone, because there's a little bit more, I guess, flexibility when it comes to, like, you can be on a very small dose of T and still start to see some changes. You can stop T and retain some changes, whereas estrogen and testosterone blockers don't really have the same effect on individuals. And so, is there ever a point where you see yourself stopping taking T, and is there a like a threshold that you want to hit, or is your transition just kind of like in flux and however it happens happens?
I think it's in flux. I don't see myself stopping for a while because I kind of just want to see how deep my voice can get. It was really soft before transitioning, and looking at videos is just wow. Like I can't believe I sounded like that, but I still have my days when I'm like, I really sound like that. I sound like a little girl, which I don't. I don't, but I feel like it could get deeper. And no, yeah, I'm curious to see the changes, the differences that will be there 4 years from now, or 4 years on T. The only thing I'm not really looking forward is getting my dad's hairline,
The balding, yeah,
the bald
all the trans masks
and
I
from one
know.
corner, but it's okay. I got plenty of hair.
Say, just keep the number of like trans masculine folks I know who they're just like, I got bangs when I started T, or like, I started pulling my hair to the front of my head because that hairline. I love it. But no, your hair looks great. You're doing great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Crystal, what about for you? Getting to this place in your not so much identity, but your presentation.
Mhm.
What did that journey look like for you?
For me, it's been all right. In high school, I'm sorry if you hear background noises, by the way. There's a lot of cars driving by. But in high school, I did have short hair, like super, super short hair. And I should have seen that as a sign. I really should have seen that as a sign for what was to come. But as soon as I started college the year after that, I just started growing my hair, but I I knew I was non-binary. I had heard that language sometime in high school, and I was curious to kind of experiment and like grow my hair out longer and like embrace the fluidity of like my presentation. I wouldn't call myself gender fluid. I'm just non-binary, but I do see my gender in more of like a fluid light. I tended to be like more feminine and lean into it because growing up as a child, I was like, I can't be feminine. Like I felt like it was really strict on me, and I rejected like femininity a lot growing up. But when I went into college, I was like, I could try it out. So I did try it out. Ever since I graduated from college, though, I've kind of been, I don't know how to say, I haven't been taking like a super active role in like changing my presentation too much. Though I am gonna get a massive haircut very soon. So I'm very excited to announce that. I'm just like trying to decide on a day, but it's gonna be big. So I'm very excited for it. I'm gonna do big haircut. And yeah, I've also been in the past like year and a half wearing like almost exclusively like masculine clothes, and it's been really nice. I feel really good about myself, and embracing like different styles of like what is my style and like discovering what clothes I like, and not just wearing like really baggy graphic t-shirts and really baggy pants and like sneakers. Even though that's what I like to wear, like it's not totally like the most refined style right now.
I love that.
In my
And
eternity so far.
I love that. And you said this piece of like you haven't been very active in like changing your gender presentation lately, but I mean, would you say that you're feeling like more settled in the fact of like this is like the niche of gender that I like to look? Or what does have you found a presentation then that feels comfortable of like,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a really good question. I thought I kind of like the idea of like having um, like moments of I'm gonna lean into this more and trying it out, because I have felt comfortable before being like more feminine and like wearing makeup and doing my nails, and like that to me was like me finding myself. And then now recently like leaning into my masculinity and like seeing that as beautiful too, but in a trans way. Really beautiful.
I love that because I feel like when I was listening to you chat, you know, I tell people a lot of the times when I first had come out as trans, as non-binary, I hyper masculinized myself. I got the super short haircut. I stopped wearing makeup. I started wearing really baggy shirts and binding and got rid of anything bright colored. I started wearing a lot of dark colors because to me that felt like if I'm not a girl, you know, I must be perceived as anything not girl. And for me it was so distressing to be presented in the slightest as feminine. And recently in the past couple of years, I've separated myself from that hyper masculine version of myself. I've gotten more comfortable embracing, like you said, the fluidity of my expression. I mean, yesterday I was running around wearing a dress um and you know, when I was interacting with this person who had never met a trans person before, it kind of caught her off guard of like, well, why do you dress like a woman if you're, you know, not a woman? And it's like, well, I'm not dressing like a woman. I'm dressing like Evan, and Evan doesn't have to confine themselves. So I love that. I think it's a very relatable kind of piece of this experience of finding ourselves, and as we feel more affirmed in our identities, allowing ourselves more play with gender presentation and gender expression. Very cool. We do have confirmation that we have someone watching us. We have a viewer who has a question for us. And I really appreciate this question. I wanted to ask, as a mother, what can you do if you struggle to remember your child's pronouns? That's honestly beautiful. I love that. Here's what I'll say as an educator, and then I'll leave it to our panelists. The intention matters so much more than the follow through, right? So, this piece of if you are trying, your kiddo sees that most likely, depending on their age. They may be like in that really angsty teenage age where they just don't want to see that you're trying to support them. But that effort is really what I think we feel. And at least with our parents, at least with my parents, that's what I could feel. So Crystal, Atlas, any advice for this mom who's really trying to figure things out for kiddo?
Yeah, from experience, I feel like it just trying it out. Just keep on trying and putting the effort. Make sure your kid sees that you're putting that effort to try those pronouns and writing them out randomly if you need to, just on a note. Write their name and their pronouns. Make a list and try to remember daily, just like little notes, like in mental notes to keep trying. Feel like it's gonna stick eventually.
Yeah, for me, I also say practice, practice, practice. Um, as long as it will come second nature eventually, even if it doesn't feel like it at the moment. But putting in the practice, putting in the work, it's gonna really make a difference. So, yeah.
And something else that we share during our trainings in this line of practice, because there's really nothing to do but practice. And similar to what Atlas said of writing things out, if you are doing your child's laundry while you're folding their clothes, saying, "Oh, this is Evan's shirt. They like to wear this shirt when they go to the beach," and saying that out loud, and then it becomes part of our muscle memory in addition to our innate thought process, right? Or when you walk past their room, this is Crystal's room, this is where they go to do their homework. If you see a restaurant, oh, that's Atlas's favorite restaurant, they like to go there for their birthday every year, right? And this piece of finding the excuse to use these skills in your day-to-day, not just when your kiddo's around, but places that you can practice just while you're practicing. Because I mess up pronouns all the time. I am notorious about it with some of my kiddos who use neopronouns in particular. I don't have a lot of experience with that. And so, I'm going to mess up. And so I sit there and I practice. Okay, this is, Zer drawings that Z did. And Z goes to the store with Zer mom. And I have to practice saying these things out loud so that they feel more innate to me. So I love that. It will take practice. Be gentle with yourself, be gentle with your kiddo as well, because this may have been something that they've been thinking about for years. And so they may be tired, but you both are, I'm sure, doing an amazing job. And they're pretty lucky to have a mom who's engaging in these sorts of conversations to support them. So I love that. I do want to talk for a second, and I think this is something really relevant, especially in the non-binary community, for us to talk about, is this piece of we are all AFAB, assigned female at birth, trans masculine individuals, right? And that's kind of a unfortunate circumstance for the sake of this panel, because I think there is a perception that the non-binary community is largely AFAB trans masculine, that we all look the same way, that we all are like that androgynous, skinny, and I think that does like a real disservice to this community of the piece of there's a lot of different ways that gender gets expressed. Martine, who is our resident tech guru, is chatting with us. Is this the part where I appear from the shadows? Martine, I would love it if you want to chat a little bit about, being AMAB and being non-binary and how that experience has been for you, because that's something I don't think there's enough individuals who put a spotlight on our assigned male non-binary population, because I think there's an entirely different experience that's being had. I mean, I'll say, at least for me, I'm not sure, Crystal, Atlas, if you had the same experience. As an assigned female person, experimenting with my masculinity was welcomed, right? This piece of cutting my hair short, this piece of presenting more masculinity, hi Martine, all of that was something that society really embraced in me. And so for individuals who are assigned male at birth to experiment with femininity, and Martine, I know this is something you've told me about before, that was a really hard thing. That was something that was challenged by the people around you. So yeah, I'd love to hear if you want to talk a little bit about that.
I would totally join in on the conversation. Hello, everyone. And shout out to my mom, because that was totally my mom who gave that question. So I would love to give kudos to Pamela. So thanks for being open and honest, Pam. So I struggled with my gender identity for years, and I really, talking about like language, I didn't have that language, right? I didn't really understand how to communicate the way I felt inside, which I went through a phase. I'll be 30 tomorrow, and I know, I'm so excited. And so basically, like, I went through this phase, so I would say around like 24 and on, where I really struggled with my gender identity and my presentation, because when I was younger in my high school days, I was very effeminate and femme presenting, and I wore makeup. I had a lot more, like, I still carry bags, but like, that's recent. I stopped carrying bags for years because I felt uncomfortable, and a lot of it had to do with the surroundings and the fact that I had my fem side kind of, for a pretty put on point set of words, beat out of me. And, that was this, had a lot of hard times with understanding why I was accepted the way I was in my home, and like my home with my family, and then outward in society, I was perceived differently. And so that was a big part of it as well. And so for me, in the non-binary community and in the trans community, I've just felt so free because my gender expression, right, is very fluid. I enjoy wearing skirts much more than I enjoy wearing pants. I think pants are a torture device. And then there are individuals like Evan who I think enjoy wearing pants. And Crystal, we've learned that you enjoy wearing shorts and pants, right? So I think for me, I just don't. I just don't. And I think it also could be because for years I was kind of made to feel like I couldn't wear other things, right? And even now, when I talk to other people who are trans masked, like I am like a I always refer to myself actually as like an NFT, a non-binary femtop. Great little like wonderful thing out there. So, but as someone who is non-binary and presents as masculine for a larger portion of time, but feels in very feminine, right? That for me is a very big difficulty. And with other individuals who are kind of in the same cut of cloth that I am within the community that I've talked to, we kind of all feel the same way. Like you were saying, Evan, like there's a specific representation of what it means to be non-binary, and also about like who can use they them pronouns. I think is also another really interesting thing that like only non-binary people can. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all, but like, like pronouns are just pronouns. So, if someone utilizes pronouns, for me, that just makes me feel like I'm having more of a point of inclusion within society. And it's not me necessarily outing myself as a non-binary person. And then I know that you and I haven't had conversations where like being non-binary and being queer, like wanting to be more visibly queer and more visibly non-binary, right? For whatever that means, because like you almost don't want to be perceived as that. And so I think for me, as someone who is perceived as masculine and isn't perceived as what the cut of cloth is for being non-binary. Sorry if you can hear the dogs out my door now. See, it's everybody has noise. But I think for me, and I don't want to speak for the whole community, but like I think it makes it hard to find. Actually, I'm not going to say that. I will say that I found more comfortability and family in the trans and non-binary community within the LGBTQ community than I feel like I have in the cisgender side of things. And my trans sisters are probably the people who have gassed and lit me up the hardest. And so that's just tea. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Now made 3.
I love that. Thank you, Martine. And you touch on a lot of things that I'm like, oh, that's a jumping point, right? That's the rest of this conversation. And we only have such a limited time. And so I think it's tricky. But you in particular mentioned this piece of maybe we want to talk about who is allowed to use they, them pronouns, right? And this is something we encounter a lot in our trainings of this piece of, oh, I'm a cisgender woman. Can I use they, them pronouns to normalize it? And I think that's a really nuanced conversation that like I'm not the authority on, and I can't give that answer. But language is like gender. Language is super fake, right? I love language. I have a deep passion for how language evolves. And I think there's this piece where if they, them feels comfortable for you, if they, them feels right for you, I don't think it necessarily matters what your gender identity is. It's none of my business what your gender identity is. What's my business is what language feels authentic to you. And so I think that's a really interesting point. And I'm curious, Atlas, Crystal, how you both feel about it as well. And this piece of how the language has kind of been evolving, and what does cisgender participation in this deconstruction of the gender binary, what does that look like almost?
For me, I already said money is fake, so language, of course, is fake too. um, but the way I'm approaching it, I'm really trying to shift myself to only use they them pronouns for anyone, if especially if it's someone that I don't know. I just feel it's better for me to set my mindset that that's just the neutral for anyone and it can be used for anyone. It's not like you're gonna misgender someone if you use they them pronouns on them, unless you actually know their pronouns and you're doing it on purpose. So yeah, I feel like I also slip up often, not too often, but I do notice myself slipping up, and I just want to make my mind shift that way to just use they them pronouns, because even before I came out as non-binary and I even knew what non-binary meant, I feel like I would slip up a lot. And that's, to me, that was a language thing, because I am bilingual and my native language was Spanish, and I would slip up, um, before even knowing about gender neutral pronouns. So I feel like just attempting to change my my view of pronouns and how to address people, that's like doing my part there.
I love that. And that's also something where like I try really hard to be intentional about if I don't know someone's pronouns using that they them. And I love that you mentioned that piece of it's not an excuse to then use they them for everyone, including folks who you know their pronouns are not they them, right? But this piece of I definitely fall into those assumptions that we as a society have been conditioned to make about a person's pronouns, and that conscious choice to use they them for everyone that I don't know their pronouns, that's really hard even for a non-binary person, right? So I love that you brought that up. Thank you. Crystal, how do you feel about, they them pronouns and the language and deconstruction of gender?
I 100% agree with y'all. I also think like I don't want to make this like a hot take or anything, but also like we have bigger fish to fry than like than just focusing on pronouns. Of course, like if someone tells you their pronouns, absolutely have to respect them, like without a doubt. Even if you think like a binary trans person, you could refer to them as they them. Like if they didn't say that, you can't do that. Um, but generally speaking, like if it's a question of a cis person being like, hey, can I use they them, like yeah, that they're just pronouns. We have bigger fish to fry in the community and things that are going on a little larger of a scale than like a cis person asking about which pronouns they can use. Like of course that has nothing to do with like me personally.
Right. It's kind of
But
like this piece of like your struggle doesn't take away from my struggle. You using they them pronouns does not take away somebody else's ability to use they them pronouns. Right? There's not a finite amount of people who can use they them at any given time. Yeah. And I think that also encourages that piece, and I love that you brought this up, Crystal, but this encourages kind of that piece of like, even if you feel, maybe you feel secure in your gender identity, maybe you've never questioned your gender identity, you're allowed to still experiment with pronouns and what language feels authentic to you. Because if you've never tried something else on, maybe you find that you actually do have very strong feelings about what pronouns feel authentic to you. And it's like, okay, well, that was a cool thought experiment. I am a she, her, though. And, it's being able to say, like, this was dipping my toes into it. And I think that helps you empathize with the trans and non-binary experience a little bit better is once you start to like test out the waters of gender identity and the social construct and these different pieces of the fact that you are allowed to do things like experiment with different pronouns, experiment with different names. I think that can help people empathize with our experiences a little bit more, and it feels a little bit less distant.
Can I ask a question of everyone? Because, like, I'm curious, and this is in the same ballpark that we're talking right now. So, on the flip side of it, what is everyone's take on people who are non binary and use binary, like, pronouns, I guess? So, like, he, they, she, they, versus, right? Or like someone like Atlas who uses they, he, right? I think for a lot of individuals who either get tripped up on pronouns to begin with, and then two, like, get very maybe like confused on what it means to be non-binary when they see or they perceive non-binary with a certain set of pronouns. How do you educate other people, that being non-binary isn't a set of pronouns, and how your pronoun expression within being non-binary, how those two things don't always, like, you know?
You know what the question is that I'm saying? That. I think that's a really good question. Alice, do you want to talk on that since you are our present they, he, and multiple pronoun user?
Yeah, so like you said, Martin, pronouns aren't gender. They're not the same in any way or form. And well, pronouns is just another way of expressing yourself. It's gender expression. And if your expression looks several ways, then maybe you're comfortable with being addressed several different ways, whether it's binary or non binary pronouns. For me, my gender expression is masculine to some extent. So I'm comfortable using he pronouns, he or him, but there's also people that might not even care what they're addressed as, because to them gender is not that big of a deal. They have that awareness and their own belief that gender is not as structured as it is led to believe, so they're comfortable with getting addressed as he, she, or they, or z. And it's just it really depends up to the individual on how they want to be addressed. And if that's how they would like it, then we should be respectful of that.
And I think one of my slipping points always becomes, you know, that piece of I think I have a tendency of erring on what feels like the side of caution for myself. And I think that can be disrespectful of others, which is this piece of when somebody does use multiple sets of pronouns, especially someone who uses maybe they and a binary pronoun, they, he, or they, she, I think I have a tendency of only using they, them pronouns for those individuals. And that's not how that person has expressed themselves to me, right? Like if a person uses multiple sets of pronouns, you know, I should be doing my diligence to incorporate those sets of pronouns how it feels authentic to them. I have a really good friend right now who's kind of going through a gender crisis, and is curious and thinks that they might be most comfortable with they, he, and she pronouns used interchangeably. And in my brain, I interpret that as this person uses they, them pronouns. And that's not fair because that's not what this person's expressed to me, right? And so this piece of, like Martine kind of drew us in with, is that piece of you can be non-binary and exclusively use binary pronouns. You can be non-binary. There's no like non-binary pronouns. And for individuals who use multiple sets of pronouns, I think there's a real conversation around this piece of if somebody has expressed to you that they use multiple sets of pronouns, they're not telling you pick one of these two that you feel best with. It's, you know, ask this person, because I understand a lot of people have different feelings about why they use multiple sets of pronouns. I know some people who, you know, maybe like Atlas are bilingual and use they, them pronouns in English, but a binary pronoun in Spanish because that's easier right now while that language is being kind of created. And so for them, it wouldn't be appropriate for me in English to refer to them with that binary pronoun because that's not how they have expressed to me that that's how they identify, right? But I think there's this piece of having a much more in-depth conversation about what do pronouns mean to individuals and how should I be incorporating multiple pronouns into conversations. We have a coworker who uses interchangeably they and he pronouns, and I find myself very frequently just using they. And I've explicitly asked this person, you know, what pronouns, how do you want me to use the they and the he? And despite him telling me 50-50, my brain still says they, them. And that's not fair. That's not being a good ally to this person. So I like this conversation. Crystal, anything you want to add? I like to ramble, obviously.
I also feel like similarly when I see like multiple sets of pronouns. But yeah, just trying to like get into the habit of it, like as much as I want to just like, oh, they, that's already comfortable with me. That's in my vocabulary. I use it for everyone around me who also uses these pronouns. But also like being like mindful, like I need to be more intentional when I'm addressing people with multiple sets of pronouns. So, yeah.
Yeah. Love that. What a fun conversation we get to have. We've had a couple of conversations. I mean, like Martine and I have talked about being non-binary and what that means for both of us before, you know, when it was just Martine and I on the staff who identified as non-binary. And I think there's this really interesting depth that we're able to now have with this conversation that maybe we wouldn't have thought to have had when we were first meeting each other and we didn't really know what things are like, what are the hot takes and what are the things that are like comfortably controversial, you know? So I'm glad that we're able to kind of revisit this conversation and add individuals. Something else that I definitely wanted to talk about, and especially, you know, since I've talked individually with all three of you about this, is this piece of we four in this room are a very multicultural group, right? And so this piece of how has our culture impacted our expressions of our gender? How has our culture impacted our journeys with our gender? Because I think when we were talking about, you know, what does a non-binary person look like, frequently that narrative is white. And so this piece of how does a gender journey look different when you add in that piece of a different societal norm around gender, you know, because not every culture is Eurocentric in how they view gender. So I think that's something that I wanted to talk about when I, you know, found out who the panelists were going to be, because I'm like, oh, like everyone's going to have different takes on this one. So how has culture impacted your journey and the language that you use and how you express your gender? Maybe Crystal wants to go first on this one since they haven't done that before.
Yeah, sure. So I am mixed Vietnamese American. My mom is from Vietnam and all of my family on my mom's side. And also I wanted to mention that my partner is Vietnamese as well. So I'm like constantly exposed to, and also my roommate. So we're all Vietnamese here. So I'm exposed to it every day. For like a little bit of context, if y'all aren't familiar with it, Vietnam has been colonized heavily for hundreds of years and occupied, and of course the war that America had a lot of influence in has affected gender roles a lot for Vietnamese Americans. So for me personally and like my family though, I have tried embracing like more traditional like Vietnamese understandings of gender and gender roles and gender presentation and stuff. I don't speak Vietnamese, but I do know the language around like queer and trans issues, and the language itself is like not entirely there right now. The most common like words that are used to describe like being gay even is derogatory, not used in a positive sense at all. And it also came from the French, so love that, the context that comes with that. But as far as like my presentation, I used to try to lean more into like a more traditional Vietnamese understanding of gender until I realized like with the people I surround myself like day to day, like I can still be non-binary, I can still be Vietnamese and like be comfortable knowing that like I'm not breaking any traditions by being true to myself. Like in my blood, in my history, in my family, I know that I'm Vietnamese no matter what I look like, no matter what I sound like, no matter how I dress, like I know that I'm a Vietnamese person. So I try to keep that close to my heart and know that like haters can hate, but I know who I am. So
I love that. And I think that is really beautiful. And I don't know a whole lot about Vietnamese culture. So I appreciate you sharing that piece and giving us a little bit of the background around, you know, how that Eurocentric worldview, especially in particular the US worldview and imposition of gender, how that has shaped Vietnam's culture. I think that's a really important piece, is that interplay of colonization into a lot of different cultures' perceptions of identity. So I love that. And that piece of, you know, I am still Vietnamese, I am still, you know, non-binary, and those two things are always going to be true of me because like I don't need to prove that to anyone. That's how I am. I think that's a really important sentiment to share. And I think there are definitely individuals maybe who are watching now or maybe who will watch the recording of this live stream later who struggle with that piece of not feeling not feeling tied to their culture because of their identity, their trans or non-binary identity, and feeling like their ancestors or their parents or their culture would be disappointed or ashamed because they're not expressing gender the way they're supposed to. But there is no supposed to for these things. So I really appreciate you sharing that piece in particular. So thank you. Atlas, what about you?
So my parents are Mexican. We live by the border, very close to the border, and I've lived in the U.S. my whole life. But because we live in a Mexican border town, a lot of the community has those same traditional cultural values, and a lot of it. It's not as bad anymore, but a lot of it is very um, binary, and um, the basically the patriarchy runs it over here, and so it was pretty scary to come out. It was scary to see my parents' reactions, my family reactions, and what they would think, what my little cousins would think, and that's the only reason I didn't start doing anything until I moved away, because I was just filled with fear of what their opinions would be and the consequences that might come out from it. But ever since I came out, I've been pretty accepted, and there hasn't been a time where I've been told that what I'm doing is wrong or anything like that. So I'm really grateful for that, and I'm also really grateful to see that our siblings across the border are doing everything they can to improve rights for people, for women, and doing protests and everything. There's literally one last night for women, because trans women, all kinds of women, girls, they keep getting abused, disappearing, killed, and it's just having that so close to home is just very bittersweet and a little heartwarming, but sad that we have to do all that. But I'm really glad that it's there, that the community is there and showing up for all these um, protests and events, just coming together and showing up for each other.
Yeah, I was just watching the news last night and saw a story about, gosh, and I want to say it's all of Mexico now, all the states in Mexico, in regards to legal name and gender marker change. In regards to allowing trans individuals to legally change their gender markers, and I forget what the full story was, and of course, I was watching it in Spanish, which I don't speak. And so I was only picking up, what little bits I was able to get translated by the people around me. But this piece of there is progress being made. There is progress being made in Mexico in regards to trans acceptance and trans acknowledgement and this historical piece of the trans community. So I think that's really exciting. And then kind of on the flip side of that conversation, right, where Crystal and Atlas had that piece of cultural identity, non-white identity, and then reconciling their trans or non-binary identity with it. I'm curious, Martine, I know that I've had the experience, and I'm not sure if you have, but I came to terms with my gender identity before realizing my cultural identity. My family is Romani. And when my mom's family immigrated to the US, they shed that identity of being Romani because it wasn't safe for them. And so we were exclusively referred to as Hungarian. And I only recently learned that I have this background and that my family has this cultural piece. And my mom, my sister, and I have all been trying to reconnect with being Romani, but Romani culture is very similar to what Crystal and Atlas is saying, with that piece of it's become very binary, mostly by external pressure and this impact of Eurocentric opinions. And so where I also feel like I've experienced that disconnect, it's from a different perspective of I feel like I'm not allowed to be Romani because I'm non-binary, as opposed to I feel like I'm not allowed to be non-binary because I'm Romani, right? And so Martine, I'm curious, I know that's something we've talked about in the past, is this piece of reconnecting with a culture that maybe we've never had the opportunity to connect with. And so I'm curious if that has had any piece to play with your gender and how those two things have interacted.
I wouldn't say that it has anything direct to do with it, but I will say that like my lack of having a connection to I'm half Mexican. And so a lack of having connection to my heritage beyond what I've had, anchored to it, which was my dad. My dad passed away about almost 7 years ago. And so, when that happened, I felt like a loss of culture and heritage because I stopped being connected to the side of my family that offered me those traditions. And so for me, the two never overlapped, but as I started to look into my own gender identity, I was amazed to see how many other cultures outside of Western cultures already had identities, outside of the binary, and how, I just had a wonderful conversation with a woman um, about 2 weekends ago at a community kickoff for a candidate, and she's Hindu. And we had a whole about 30-minute conversation about in the Hindu religion, how there are trans gods and how it's a huge part of the culture and it's not seen down, and they're seen as people who bring in both life and destruction, right? Just like any god. And so, but it was amazing because we bonded over something that people in Western culture try to diminish and have for so long. And it does really wrap into the colonization that everyone's teaching or like touching on. And that really is the underlying fact of it, the erasure of culture. And it's sad to hear that Evan at your age and myself at my age, like we both have similar experiences within our culture, and like just having the opportunity to be able to do that. But no, nothing to do with my gender identity. But I will say I admire and was able to appreciate other cultures a lot more because I felt akin to them, because my homeland was not giving me visibility and validity behind myself. And I found that in other cultures. And I think that's for me why my spirituality led to Buddhism and Hinduism and other, spirituality paths, less focused on kind of like these westernized Anglo-Christian views of things. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I wish we had more than an hour to talk, because the intersection of like religion, I love talking about religion. So maybe that's a live stream for another day where we just gather individuals from different walks of faith, and we chat about being trans or queer and spiritual and what that means for us. But in our kind of last couple of minutes together, I just wanted to say, like, Atlas, Crystal, anything that you want to say to non-binary folks or parents of non-binary folks who may be watching right now? Awkward silence. Atlas, go first.
What I would like to say is just to keep an open mind. I feel like all these talks about gender and anything really, any LGBTQ issues are just the problems that people have against them is just from not being open-minded, I feel like. And being or identifying as a non-binary person is not any different as any other identity that our society might provide us or be there for us to identify as. So just try to be open-minded with your relatives, your children, about how they identify and how they would like to be addressed. And it really doesn't get any harder after that if you just try to keep an open mind and try to listen to your relatives and your friends or anything that try to show you and share with you that identity of theirs, because if they're sharing it, it's because it's important to them.
I love that. Crystal?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for being here for this conversation. I just want to stress the importance of like having these conversations and how you can learn more just from one conversation. So continuing to have these conversations with your family, your friends, and ultimately that's how we like change narratives and learn more about each other. So keep on having these conversations.
Martine, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Continue to educate yourself. When you don't know something, ask questions. It'll keep you young, and people are vain.
And I just want to say, for folks who may be watching who maybe aren't sure of their gender identity, or who are experiencing a little bit with their gender, it's okay to question it. It's okay to not be sure. It's okay to change your pronouns 6, 7 times. Um, and it's okay to do that private or as public as you'd like to. So this piece of knowing that, and I think we've all kind of said at different points in this live stream, gender is as real as you want it to be. If it is fake for you, it is totally fake. And if it is super real, it is super real for yourself. And allowing yourself to play with what that means for you, allowing yourself to experience the full fluidity of your identity, how you dress, how you refer to yourself, all of that is malleable. And I think it's really exciting to get to share. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for participating in this live stream, Crystal, Atlas, Martine, last minute. Thank you to those of you who listened in and hopefully had some questions answered, or maybe just got some of that community of hearing your thoughts and feelings about gender validated in some of our panelists. We are, always happy to help. We are always happy to serve. If you are questioning your gender identity, if you are looking for a safe space to, get more answers about gender or the gender of your loved ones, maybe you have trans loved ones in your life and you just don't know how to support them, we're happy to be a resource to you. We have, support groups. We have resources for parents, for youth. We have, middle school, high school, young adults up to age 30. We're working on some elementary age programming. We are available for all ages, all identities, here to support you in your journey of either affirming yourself or affirming the people around you. So that's who we are. That's what we're doing. It's 7:02. I've taken up enough of y'all's time tonight. Have a great rest of your night. And thank you so much again for joining us. Bye, everyone.